Lothar Schmid of West Germany playing Robert Byrne of the USA, and Lothar Schmid on the very brink of becoming perhaps the most unlikely finalist we've seen since the Master Game programmes have been made. At the moment, as you can see from the board, he shares the lead at the top of his group with Viktor Korchnoi, but he has this all-important game in hand against Robert Byrne, and he needs just half a point to go through to the final to meet Walter Brown from America. Interesting position this. If he loses tonight, then in that case it'll have to be a play-off against Korchnoi. With me, as usual, Bill Hartston, to give his expert analysis and comment. The question is, Bill, obviously, can Byrne beat Schmid, particularly as Schmid has the white pieces?
If Byrne's in a pugnacious mood, he can have a very good try, because Schmid is going to take a draw in any position here. He just needs half a point to get to the final, so Byrne can take risks.
Well, it looks as if they're ready to begin. It'll be Schmid white to move first, needing just half a point to get through to the final of the Master Game.
Today I'm in a quite nice position, because a draw would be sufficient to win the preliminary group, and I'm playing my old friend Bob, and he is a very solid player. It's hard to beat him, but a draw might be possible if I'm playing solidly. So I'm try e2 to e4, king's pawn.
I know that Lothar is playing for a draw. That will give him the championship of this section. Lately, I have been responding to e4 with e5 and playing a quite positional game. But I don't particularly want to play that against Lothar because he plays the Ruy Lopez very well. I don't want to play the French defense, e6, because he will almost surely play d4, d5, knight d2 line, and I don't know how I'm going to try for a win with an isolated queen pawn and nothing to go on. So I resolved, before I actually came to the table, to respond to e4 with the Sicilian, with c5.
Oh yes, that's the same opening which we had in Puerto Rico, San Juan, 10 years ago, just 10 years ago in '69. And this was a draw, but after a sharp opening. I try today another line, which I occasionally play in simultaneous exhibitions. Knight to e2, that's a Keres move. Keres played it already in the year 43, and the idea is perhaps to play c4 later and d4 if he would allow me.
Paul Keres played knight e2 against me, 25 years ago, and I was young and naive then, and I didn't get the point of the move, and I got a bad game here by playing d5, ed, queen takes d5, knight on b, c3, queen d8, d4, and white has the center, and two moves lead in development. Well, I know enough now not to repeat that mistake. Now, there are other points to that strange-looking knight e2 move. It's used sometimes by players who want to determine what kind of Sicilian you play. For example, if I play knight c6 here, then on d4, cd, knight takes d4, I'm not getting my favorite Najdorf variation of the Sicilian. That's one possible objective that white can follow when he's playing knight e2. Therefore, it can lead to a closed Sicilian with knight on b to c3, followed by fianchetto of the king-bishop. So I played the fairly non-committal, yes, I must play the non-committal d6 because I want to keep open the possibility of going into a Najdorf if he plays d4. Yes, d6.
Okay, that's, I think, his favorite line, and I do not want to play this normal Sicilian, and c4 is certainly the move which I intended to do, but I have to think on g3, which is a type of closed Sicilian, but in this case he would be able even to move his d-pawn for a second time to d5. G3, d5 would be quite good for black, because if I should take that pawn, then queen takes back and my rook on h1 is hanging. This would be no good. So c4, my original plan.
So that's it. He really is playing for a draw, and he's very determined about it. Now, the effect of this c4 is to prevent me from getting a Sicilian defense proper, except in case where I play, for example, knight c6, and he responds d4, cd, knight takes d4. That Sicilian, it seems he will let me have, as long as he can have the Marazzi bind, which gives black very little chance of playing for a win. I played the Sicilian in the first place in order to get a fighting game, but what's the point in getting an inferior game to insist on the Sicilian? Well, I didn't quite know what's the full idea in his mind, but I thought that perhaps I should prevent the Marazzi bind altogether. I don't like to make a move like e5 here, because it fixes the central square so there's very little action possible, and that would favor his getting a draw. But I don't want to give him an advantage in space. So I'm going to play e5.
Bill, what exactly is the Marazzi bind?
The Marazzi bind is the line in normal Sicilian defences. By the normal Sicilian defence, we mean those lines where white advances his d-pawn to d4 and black exchanges pawns in the centre. White's left with pawns on e4, c4, just these two, with the black c-pawn vanished and the white d-pawn vanished. This gives white a nice advantage in space. These two pawns cover this d5 square. White keeps a permanent advantage in space, and it's very difficult for black to play for a win there. So Byrne has avoided this exchange of the d-pawn, leading to the normal Sicilian, by completely wodging up the centre with these moves. I think it shows that Byrne isn't in a greatly pugnacious mood. He's not willing to give Schmid anything from this opening.
Right, well, let's go back to the game with Schmid-White to play.
Oh yes, Bob is a very experienced grandmaster, and he knows indeed if I should have come to d4, I would have had some advantage in space, and nobody likes to play against the Marazzi. But this move here brings the center into a position where both can't move anymore those pawns, and it is relatively easy if I wish to get a draw, and that's what I want to. No risk. I think I play d3 now, a quite symmetric center.
Yes, of course, the locked pawns, symmetric center. If there's going to be any breakthrough here, it's going to have to be with f4 on white's part or f5 on black's part. But it's too early to decide on the king's side yet. I'll bring out another piece. Knight c6.
Well, the position seems to be easy, but it isn't. I have to play carefully and develop first my second knight, knight b1 to c3.
In this formation, there's not a great deal to do with the king-bishop. Probably it's a little bit more useful to fianchetto it than to play the very stodgy bishop e7. So I'll go ahead with a fianchetto. If I put the pawn on g6, for one thing, it will give me support later if there's an opportunity for f5. g6.
Yes, and now I can do the same. There is no more danger on the square f3 after g3, bishop g4, bishop g2, knight to d4, and now queen a4 check. And this would be a good solution for white. So g3.
I don't like the way this is going. I intended to get a counterattack. That's why I adopted the Sicilian. We're getting a kind of what you might call a symmetrical English. It's not what I want at all. I really don't see how I'm going to be able to prevent him from getting a draw here. I don't want to play routine moves, but I don't want to do anything crazy either. I think I'll try something that Larsen has used here, advancing the h-pawn. Perhaps I can create some weak squares in the king's side. I think it's really fishy. I really think it's coffee house. But if I'm going to play for a win here at all, I have to do something fishy. h5.
Oh yes, it's a very typical move, such a variation. And he threatens to push his pawn to h4 and even h3, and I have to be a little careful. If I should play myself h3, then he would play h4, then g4 and f5. Just a strong attack for black if I should do nothing. I think better is to prevent everything and to play h4 myself.
Well, he is careful, isn't he? At the very sign of a chance for an attack, he recreates the symmetry in the pawn position. Well, perhaps this gives me the chance to get rid of my king-bishop, the bishop that's blocked by its pawns. I don't have much choice about playing positionally here. I can't get any attack. I'm going to have to play this in a positional fashion. Therefore, bishop h6.
Yes, it's a nice way to develop his king's bishop, but I should not do the same. I come bishop g2.
Well, I'm going ahead with the plan of exchanging the black square bishops. Bishop takes c1.
And now queen retakes and control the dark squares for a while.
I can't play the most active move here, which would be f5, because ef opens the diagonal of his white squared bishop and would give him a clear advantage. So it means that I have to play in a rather quiet, compressed fashion. I ought to complete my development. How to do it? If there's any feature in the position I can perhaps use, it is that his king knight has already been developed on e2. And if I develop my king knight to f6, it might have some possibility of obtaining a useful outpost at g4 later. So, knight f6.
Yes, I think that's the best move. He plays rather carefully. He has to develop his minor pieces, and myself, I can't do any better than to try to exchange queens later after queen to g5 and followed up by knight to d5, which perhaps gives me a slight advantage of space, but never more than a draw. I think queen to g5.
Queen g5. Well, that makes it difficult for me to avoid an eventual exchange of queens. I'm afraid he's getting what he wants. I'm not going to be able to prevent this game from becoming a draw. But there's one possibility I want to try anyway. If I play bishop g4, I would like to take off his knight, forcing him either to put his king in the center or to take back with the other knight, which in effect costs him a tempo. And perhaps I can demonstrate that one of the remaining knights is better than his bishop. So, well, of course, he could prevent this by playing after bishop g4. He could play f3. Then his bishop is temporarily blocked. Well, I really don't think that means very much here, but I will give it a try. Bishop g4.
I think I should not give him the possibility to exchange that bishop versus my knight e2. I think better is to play f3, and then it looks that my bishop on g2 is a poor piece, but in fact he's able to get out all the time when he wishes to h3, and this diagonal is quite a good place to work on it. And f3 in any case is the normal, the move, and I do it now.
Yes, he can afford to play f3 here, because, for one thing, he can never be stopped from playing f4 when he wants it, and if he doesn't want it, he can always do what I did, put his bishop on h3 and exchange it for my bishop, in which case I can't think how there could be even the slightest advantage for either player. And at the moment, he has a slight lead in development. That's rather annoying. So is the pin on my king knight. But I can't do anything much about that. I simply have to retreat. Bishop e6.
Well, there's not going to be any time trouble here. Byrne spent just 20 minutes over his moves, Schmid just 23. Bill, there's an interesting point there where Byrne was talking about swapping off his bishop for a knight, and in other games we've heard of players going to a lot of trouble to finish up with two bishops against a bishop and a knight. Under what sort of circumstances does a bishop become a bad enough piece to be prepared to swap it like that?
In general, knights are better than bishops in closed, blocked positions with lots of pawns on the board. Bishops are better than knights in open positions after several exchanges. So in this sort of position, we have this permanently blocked pawn structure in the centre. It's going to stay blocked forever, almost. So the knights tend to be more effective than the bishops. Black has this lovely square at d4, white has a square at d5. If Byrne could have exchanged this bishop, which was on g4, for the knight on e2, then he would have had hopes of reaching an endgame with one knight against one bishop. This white bishop not only permanently blocked by its own pawns, but also unable to control the black squares in the position. So black's knights and king would have a free travel permit over all the black squares. This is really the only way black can try to win a position like this, hoping for this ending with knight against bad bishop. But the bishop isn't so bad as long as there's another bishop to exchange it for. As he said, he can occupy this diagonal and exchange the bad white bishop any time.
Yes. Right, well, let's go back to the game with Lothar Schmid, white, to play his 12th move.
Well, there are now two moves possible, either to play that bishop to h3 and to exchange the one, if possible. And bishop h3 in that moment is not very natural. I think it is better to play knight to d5 immediately. If the bishop takes, then my bishop at least will come to h3 and covers that square c8, which might be important for one of the black's rocks. So I think is this even a chance for white to get a little advantage. Knight d5.
Well, he's making advantage of, taking advantage of his slight lead in development. I always expected that a knight would come to d5. It's only a question when. And I also knew that I should take it off when it comes. It's too well placed to leave it there. And here, of course, I have to take it, if I'm going to, with the bishop. I could possibly delay it for the moment by playing knight d7. But then, of course, he has the exchange of queens. I can't worry about that too much. I'm not going to be able to avoid that in the long run. But do I want to allow it just right here? Now, if I take the knight on d5 with the bishop, and he recaptures with the c-pawn, I'd very much like to make the natural knight move, knight d4. Then on knight takes knight on d4, I cannot take with the c-pawn because that opens the c-line, and he plays bishop h3, controlling the c8 square, and he plays quietly, castling, doubling rooks on the c-line, and possibly he wins that game. I have no counterbalancing play to match that on the c-line. So, well, again, coming back to bishop takes d5, I could just move my knight away on either pawn recapturing. I don't have to put it on d4, or if I do put it on d4 and he captures, I could take with the e-pawn. I'm not quite sure about that pawn formation, because he could play, again, bishop h3 and f4, and his f4 pawn and e4 pawn are mobile, and it might be possible for him to find some breakthrough later with e5 or f5. Well, anyhow, I'm going to take on d5. Bishop takes d5.
That's indeed the natural move. Another possibility would have been to retreat a knight to d7, but I think he should have a clever defense even now. First I have to take, of course, with the c-pawn, and later on I should have possible chances to push the f-pawn and to open that file.
So he takes with the c-pawn. Yes. Well, I could play knight d4 here and get that position with knight takes d4, e, d. I don't know if I want that position. It's possible for me to play knight b8 now, and then quietly continue with knight d7. He could eventually have then some pressure on the f line by playing f4. And besides, what if he decides that his position deserves more than a draw, and that he can pursue it without taking too many chances? I don't like that idea. I could play knight b4, but that I don't like here, because on knight b4 he can play queen d2, followed possibly by a later a3, driving the knight to a6, and then b4. Well, I doubt he'll look for anything tricky here, but I will give some chance and play Queen A5 check.
Oh, this is a genius defense. It looks like that I should win one of the two knights which are attacked now after King F2. But he plays after King F2 easily knight to H7, and then the other knight will move in the next time, and he will not lose any piece. I think I exchange queens now, which brings us to a quite even position. Queen D2.
Yes, well, here comes an endgame, and I'm certainly not doing anything with it. If anything, I think he has a slight advantage here. The center pawns could possibly be useful. He has some chance of opening the F line. But in any case, I have to remove the queens here. Queen takes D2.
King takes queen, and I think that's now a good moment to offer him a draw. A draw for me is sufficient, and otherwise, if he would not accept this, then I should have a quite easy game with bishop to H3, and later both rooks on the F file, and F4, and some pressure even. I think he should be quite happy to accept this draw.
May I offer you a draw? Thank you.
That was very well done, Lothar. That was a very clever, I think, a very clever choice of opening.
I think you defended extremely well. It was not so easy as it looked for a while.
Not quite the Grandmaster draw par excellence, where neither of them want to lose, but very nearly. So surprising, perhaps, that Robert Byrne played like that, just allowing Schmid to dictate the game.
Yes, I was a little surprised too, but it just shows how difficult it is playing for a win with the black pieces against a strong Grandmaster intent only on drawing.
Do you ever feel that perhaps you might have a little gamble? Do you think Robert Byrne might have had a little gamble there?
I think he should have. The only way to try is to play bad chess and really force the opponent to play for a win. But Byrne is a good player and just couldn't bring himself to play bad chess. How can a lecturer in pre-Socratic philosophy force himself to play bad moves?
Well, he probably can't. Right, next week's final now, Schmid against Walter Brown, another American. Quick forecast?
I think a win for White, whoever that may be.
Oh, they have to draw for that indeed. Right, well, if anybody had said at the beginning of this tournament that neither Viktor Korchnoi nor Vlastimil Hort would get through to the final, I don't think any of us would have believed them. That is indeed what has happened. Lothar Schmid, possibly the most improbable finalist we've ever had in the Master Game, playing against Walter Brown, a very bright and lively American. Should be a fascinating final. We have no idea who's going to play black, who's going to play white. That could be critically important. All will come clear next week. Until then, from all of us here in Bristol, good night.